Here from you guys that I'm going to get started on. Before I get into them, though, I just wanted to say that if I read your question, then you are one of the 10 winners, and going to get an email then tomorrow morning with instructions on how we're going to deliver the book to you. So if I read your question, then you're one of the 10 winners. And I gotta say, there were some really good questions in the batch here. Few ones I've seen before, a few new ones, but a nice selection. So I'm going to read through this and give my answers to each of these questions. Hopefully you'll find it interesting. If not, I'm sure you can send me lots of letters and tell me about it. So the first question I have here is from Liam, and this is from December 1st at 6:24 p.m. And Liam writes, "How old were you when you started writing? When did you get the idea for Inheritance?" Well, I started writing pretty much as soon as I can remember. I didn't actually enjoy reading and writing when my mom first started teaching it to me. But eventually, I ended up reading a book long time ago. It was a very thin detective novel, and it had sort of an interesting cover, an interesting title, so I pulled it off the shelf and checked it out. First book I'd ever checked out from the public library. And when I started reading that book, for whatever reason, it was as if a switch just got flipped inside of my head. And all of a sudden, instead of seeing the words, just the words on the page, I could actually see what they represented in my head. So instead of seeing the word for sunset, I could actually see a sunset in my head. I don't know why that little switch occurred, that flip, if you will, when I read that book. And I don't even remember the name of the book. The only thing I remember about it is that it involved tomato sauce being mistaken for blood, which seemed kind of fun to me when I was 5 years old. But that was the experience that got me into reading and then later on into writing, because I loved the reading so much. I wanted to try to write the sort of things that I enjoyed reading. Lots of adventures and traveling to foreign locations and living out in the wilderness. Lots of stuff that I really enjoyed reading about. I wrote a lot of short stories growing up. No more than 2 or 3 pages. I think 3 pages was really like the longest story I'd ever written before Eragon. And I did actually try writing a couple of books in the year preceding Eragon. The problem is that I didn't know where any of the stories were going. I would get the initial idea for a story, like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if a young man found a dragon egg out in the middle of the wilderness? And I'd start writing on whatever the idea might be, but since I didn't know what happened after that initial piece, I basically would run into a brick wall as a writer, because I'd be trying to figure out the story while writing, and my brain just doesn't work like that. So I tried writing a couple of books before Eragon, didn't get anywhere with them. And then I read a book called Jeremy Thatcher Dragon Hatcher by Bruce Coville. And it's a great young adult fantasy book. If you haven't read it, I recommend it. And it's about a young man in this world who goes into a beat-up old shop and he finds a stone that ends up hatching a dragon egg. And I love that idea so much of a young man finding a dragon egg that I asked myself all sorts of questions. And this is actually how I created the story and the world for the Inheritance cycle. I asked myself, where would a dragon egg come from? What sort of a world would a dragon live in? Who might find a dragon egg out in the wilderness? Who else would be looking for a dragon egg like that? Since, dragons can't be that common, someone would be looking for it. Who would be the young man that would find the egg? What would his family be like? How does he live? How does his family make a living? So just by asking questions like that and then trying to answer them, I was able to create the story for the entire cycle/series. Plotting is really no more difficult than that. Just asking questions and then trying to answer them. So that's how that's sort of the answer to how old I was when I started writing and when I got the idea for Inheritance. And I actually got the idea for Inheritance when I was 14. And I tried writing Eragon twice before I actually was able to get through it. And the only reason I was able to get through it is because I worked out the actual structure of the series. I've used this comparison a lot when I do presentations, but I really am fond of it because I think it's true, at least for me. And that is that I believe, for me, writing is like music. And it's very hard in that it's very hard to compose a piece of music while you're performing it. It's much easier to compose it first, and then you can concentrate on performing the piece of music as beautifully as possible. And that really is what plotting is for me when I go to write a book. All right, so question number 2. And this question is from Sam. Sam wrote this on November 26th at 4 p.m. And Sam wrote, "At the 2010 National Scout Jamboree, you spoke of a science fiction series that you were working on. Can you give us an update on that?" Well, since the Jamboree, I forget what month that was in 2010, most of my time was spent working on finishing Inheritance, the 4th and final book in the Inheritance cycle, and also editing the book, and then of course going on tour for it. So I haven't had a lot of time to write on much anything else. I have started a short story. I've started a few over the years, but I started a short story about 2 months ago, and it's science fiction as well. It's actually a bit of a lead-in to the sci-fi book I'm going to write next. And I am pretty sure I am going to write the sci-fi book next. But I have some more traveling coming up. I'm going to be going over to Europe for more of a book tour for Inheritance next year, sort of April, May is when I'll be over there. And I don't know how much writing I'll be able to do before I go over to Europe. So we'll just have to see on that. But no, I'm definitely going to write the science fiction novel next. That said, I do have a lot more stories that I want to tell in Eragon's world. So I have, and in fact, I laid the groundwork for that in both Brissinger and Inheritance. So you might see a few little plot threads that weren't 100% resolved in Inheritance, and each one of those is the beginning to another book and/or series. But I'm not going to return to Alagasia right away. You know, I've spent 13 some years working on this series, and I need a break. But I definitely will return to it eventually. Okay, next question. This is from Damon, who wrote this on December 1st at 2:21 p.m. I do enjoy giving the times with these questions. And Damon said, "I've been working on a novel myself. What tips would you give to a young author?" Well, the tips I'd give to a young author are the tips I would give to any aspiring writer or anyone who wants to get published. The first one would be to read everything you can get your hands on. Writing is, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Read everything you can get your hands on. Read what it is you love to read, obviously. You know, make that your primary focus. But also read stuff that's sort of outside your comfort zone, because you will learn more from stuff you don't normally read than you will from whatever it is you do normally read. So that's one. Read all you can. 2, write every single day. Write on weekends, write on weekdays, write on your birthday, write on holidays. You can take Christmas off. You can take Christmas off, but other than that, write every single day. I mean, even if you're in the hospital, if you can, you should be writing. And the reason is that it's just like a musical instrument. Again, I like my comparison with music. The more you practice your instrument, the better you're going to get at it. And, you know, you shouldn't be waiting for inspiration. You know, I get inspiration about once every 3 months. In the meantime, I write. So write every single day. 3, find someone in your life, a teacher, family member, friend, someone who can read your work and give you constructive feedback on it. Basically, someone who can edit your work. I know editing can be very, very painful, but the thing is you will learn more from editing than you ever will from actually writing. And as painful as it is, having someone who can sort of tell you where you're going wrong makes a big difference. Again, you can compare it to music, where you really can't teach yourself how to sing. You need someone a voice coach who can listen to you and tell you when you're hitting false notes. And that's really what writing is like. Again, next, I'd say learn everything you can about the language you're writing in, whether it's English or some other language. The language you write with is the tool of the trade, and the better you understand it, the better you're going to be able to get what's in your head onto the page into someone else's head. Also, write about whatever it is you care about the most. Writing is often a very, very tough thing to do, so if you truly care about the subject material, that'll get you through the rough spots. And don't let anyone else tell you what you should or shouldn't be writing. If you want to write about flying toasters or singing mermaids or a gritty, realistic novel, that's fine. If that's what interests you, write about it. Also, I would recommend plotting everything out beforehand. That does not work well for every author, however. So you're going to have to figure out if you're an author who works well with plotting things out beforehand. Also, I'd recommend 2 books to you. One would be Story by Robert McKee. That's Story by Robert McKee. And Characters and Viewpoint by Orson Scott Card. Characters and Viewpoint by Orson Scott Card. And those 2 books helped me a lot when I was starting out writing, and I think they might help you as well if you want to write. Okay, question 4, and this is from Sarah on December 7th at 5:53 p.m. And Sarah wrote, "Was it very hard to finish and leave a story that you've been working on for so many years?" Well, it was. As I said, I've been working on this series for close to 13 years now. I mean, I started Eragon thinking of it and working on it all the way back in 1998, which is probably before some of you were born. So it is a very long time, a very big part of my life. And when I wrote the last page and I wrote the last scene of Inheritance, I actually didn't think it was really going to affect me, because I've always known how the story was going to end, and I always knew what I was going to do, and I could see it coming. It was not a surprise when I got to the end of the book. But when I actually wrote that last scene and wrote that last page, I just felt this incredible rush of heat pass through me, and I actually started shaking. I mean, it was like I had a chill. I really did. I started shaking, and it was such an intense sensation. I had to stop working on the last page and on this last sentence, and I had to put it aside and go do something else for a couple of weeks. I went and did the editing, and it irritated me because I knew the last sentence wasn't right. I was just so caught up in the sensations and the emotion, I couldn't finish that last sentence and make it right. But when I came back to it after the editing, after having some time apart and, I'd calmed down a bit, then I was able to fix that last sentence. And I made you might not think it was a huge change, but from my perspective, I made a huge change to that last sentence. And what I did was I added 1 word to it. And if you read it, the word was dark. I added the word dark to the last sentence, and that's what it needed. That made it perfect. But I was sad to say goodbye to the world and the characters that I've spent all this time thinking about pretty much every single day. But at the same time, I was really excited to, finish the series and to know that readers like you finally were going to be able to, see the end of the story and enjoy the end of the story, and that I was going to be able to move on to some new projects as well. So it was bittersweet, but I would say it was more happy than sad. Definitely more happy than sad. Okay, let's see. Next question, and this is from Justin, who wrote this on December 7th at 4:37 p.m. And Justin wrote, "Did you ever have writer's block, and how did you get over it if you did?" That's a great question. I think I partially answered this, actually, now that I really think about it, when I was talking about outlining. If I don't outline, or if I don't work out an outline in my head before I start to write, I get instant writer's block. It just happens over, within a second or two. In fact, if I even try to write nonfiction without having some idea of where I'm going, it doesn't work at all. The two ways I've found to solve that are, one, again, as I say, outline everything beforehand. But the other one is to go for a nice long walk. And a lot of authors that I know do this as well. Very famous ones like Charles Dickens and others, to writers like myself. And there's something about walking, and I don't know quite what it is, but there's something about walking that really clears your mind. It makes it easy to think out story problems. And a lot of times talking out your story to someone else can be very helpful. So, you go on a walk with someone or even by yourself and you just talk, even to yourself, and you work out the problems, talk out the problems in the story. All of that can be very, very helpful. In fact, I'm just trying to think if there's any other tips here. Actually, there's a science fiction author by the name of Kevin J. Anderson. You might be familiar with some of his work. I know he's done some Star Wars novels and many others as well. But he actually writes all of his books while walking, while hiking. And he does that. He dictates them into a recording device while he is, going up a mountain or something. So that's kind of an extreme example of walking helping a writer. I've never tried that myself, but it seems to work really well for him. So I may give it a shot for a short story or something. I think you have to sort of train your mind to work like that if it's going to, if that's going to be something you want to do professionally. All right, next question. Now, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to say your name correctly, so I apologize if I'm mispronouncing. It's either Jaya or Jaya. I think it's Jaya. And Jaya wrote this on December 7th at 5:27 p.m. And Jaya said, "Who is your favorite author and how has he/she inspired your work?" Oh boy. The thing is, I have a lot of favorite authors, and I was really inspired by all of them when I started writing Eragon. In fact, my goal with Eragon was to write the same sort of story that I enjoyed reading, and to put all the elements I enjoyed about fantasy into one book. So, I wanted to have the wise old mentor, and the evil villain, and the dragons and elves and dwarves and the young hero, and it just, all the stuff I really enjoyed about fantasy. Some of the books and authors that had an influence on me that I really loved growing up were the Dragon Riders of Pern series by Anne McCaffrey, the Redwall series by Brian Jakes, a Wizard of Earthsea and the two sequels by Ursula K. Le Guin, Magician and sequels by Raymond E. Feist, the trilogy Memories, Sorrow, and Thorn by Tad Williams, the Gormenghast trilogy by Mervyn Peake, A Worm Ouroboros by E.R. Edison, a book you've probably never heard of called The Mabinogion Tetralogy by Evangeline Walton, again very good, Dune by Frank Herbert, the Belgariad and the Malorian and the Elenium by David Eddings, the Pit Dragon trilogy by Jane Yolen, a bunch of books by Andre Norton, probably a lot of others that I'm forgetting now as well, lots of science fiction, Heinlein, Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke, all of those, Tolkien, of course, can't forget Tolkien. Yeah, all of those had a big, big influence on me when I set out to write Eragon. And actually, out of all those books, I think the one I've read the most is Dune. I wouldn't say that it's my absolute favorite out of all of those, but it's the one I've enjoyed reading the most and the one that's had so much influence on me. And I'd also have to throw in Anna Karenina by Tolstoy, a lot of Jane Austen. Those were all things that I read or were read to me growing up. Okay, let's see. This next question is from Margaret, and she wrote this on December 7th at 5:50 p.m. And Margaret said, "How did you come up with the languages included in your series?" Well, I did it in a couple of different ways. The first language that I created, of course, was the ancient language, the elf language for the series. And the very first invented word / imaginary language that shows up in the series is in Eragon when Brahm uses the word Brissinger to start a fire. And when I wrote that scene, I knew I needed a word for fire. And I thought, well, I could come up with one from scratch, but it would be really fun if I could have a word that most people weren't familiar with, but actually had some sort of historical link to the word fire. So I had a dictionary of word origins. In fact, I can show you guys this. And I've never shown anyone else this before in an interview, but hopefully you can see this. This is the exact book, Dictionary of Word Origins, which my parents bought for me, or we just had it in the house a long time ago. And I was flipping through it, just browsing through the entries, and I found a reference to a very obscure word, which was a root for the word fire, the modern-day word for fire. And of course, that word was Brissinger. And I really liked the sound of it. And I saw that it came from Old Norse, so I said, okay, I'll use Brissinger, and then I will, I'll search out some more words in Old Norse and incorporate them and use them as the basis for this language of mine. And that's exactly what I did, and I really do think it gave it a nice sound and feel. So, for example, the Elvish blessing that Eragon encounters in Book 2, in Eldest, would sound, I'll recite it for you to give you an idea of what it would sound like. Now, I have to warn you, I don't really have a great Elvish accent, and that's because in the ancient language you are supposed to roll your R's on the tip of your tongue like you would in Italian or Spanish. But the only way I can roll my R's, and I know this sounds kind of weird, but the only way I can roll my R's is by wiggling my uvula. And the uvula, that's the thing that hangs in the back of your throat. So in any case, here's how you would pronounce a blessing in ancient language while wiggling your uvula. Atra sterni onothelduin, ranerlifa uninhjarta onner, undu everinia onovarda. So like I said, it gives it a nice sound and feel. But the language I'm most fond of is the dwarf language. Because the dwarf language I created from scratch, and I think it has a really nice sound and feel. And unlike the ancient language, I actually have an excellent Dwarvish accent. So a chunk of Dwarvish from Eldest. Yes, I am doing this from memory. Chunk of Dwarvish from Eldest would go... Vorm Vrefkarach, Vorm Jürgen Karmiter, nos eta Groth Bastarnog, Dor incesti Rakithen, Jok iswarv as Barzulagur, Dor Dorgrimst as Schweldenrak Anuin, Mog Torrak Jürgenvren. And I think I forgot to say that the reason I have a good Dwarvish accent is because you're supposed to roll your R's by wiggling your uvula in Dwarvish. The only problem with Dwarvish is you tend to get very hoarse while saying it, but I like it. I've always said that if I could go into Eragon's world, that I would actually I'd prefer to be a dwarf. I think the dwarves have more fun than the elves, and yeah, I'd like to write a dwarvish opera at some point. That would be amusing. In any case, the way you actually go about creating a language is you simply choose a number of sounds. You say A is going to sound like this in this situation, or when put in conjunction with these vowels. You decide on what vowels you're going to have, what consonants, and then you just start working up the rules for how those letters and sounds are going to interact. There are some really great websites that you can find on how to create imaginary languages. And the thing is if you really get into it, you could spend a lifetime creating a language, because when you really get into it, the thing is you don't just say, oh, this word sounds like this. You have to explain the reasoning behind each word. You know, every word didn't just spring out of nowhere. Every word has a history. You know, it evolved from other words. It developed from other languages going back to the mists of time. So creating a proper language from scratch is a daunting task. And, you know, I did not want to go to quite the lengths Tolkien did, since he basically spent most of his life working on his languages. But I am proud of what I did do, and I had a lot of fun with it. And there's some fun words in the languages, too, which I can't really think of them right off the top of my head, but there are definitely some that I'm very fond of the sounds. Okay, Ronnie. Next question's from Ronnie. And he wrote this on December 6th at 2:40 p.m. And Ronnie wrote, "What is the coolest thing about being a famous author?" You know, I think there's a lot of cool things. One of the coolest is just getting to meet other authors. You know, I'm a big fan of fantasy writers and other writers, just the way you guys are. So, you know, whenever I meet an author, I'm usually like, "Oh wow, can I get your signature? Can you sign a book for me?" Which is kind of fun, getting the opportunity to do that. And sometimes they do the same in return to me, which is always nice. I think the other fun thing about being an author is that I get to meet the readers of this series, and I get to go to the places like Comic-Con in San Diego and the Jam. Sorry about that, guys. Apparently the program crashed on me. See me. I'm not sure exactly where I went off the air here, so I'm going to back up slightly, and hopefully I'm not going to repeat myself too much. If I do, you guys can let me know after the fact. Okay, so the question I was answering was from Ronnie, who wrote it on December 6th at 2:40 p.m. And Ronnie wrote, "What's the coolest thing about being a famous author?" And as I said before, I think there are a lot of cool things about being an author. One is getting to meet other authors and, play fanboy myself, get my books signed, get an autograph from them. And sometimes they do the same in return, which is always lots of fun. The other really fun thing is getting to meet readers, getting to go to events, go to the Jamboree, go to book signings, and sign people's books, hear what they think of the books. Just that's really, really something, and sometimes I get to hear people who've come up to me and say that, it was Eragon that got them into reading. And that really, really means a lot to me. So that's fun. Let's see, other cool things I've gotten to do being an author. Well, I think I mentioned at the beginning of this broadcast was I got to actually do some live sparring on stage before my event in Kansas City during this tour. So that was pretty cool. That was very cool. All sorts of stuff. I think mainly just the traveling, meeting the readers, and of course, meeting the fans. And meeting other authors. Sorry, repeating myself. Little bit of jet lag. All right. Next question. This is from Riley, who wrote this on December 7th at 4:21 p.m. And Riley wrote, "You told us that all questions would be answered with this final installment to the cycle. Yet as many have realized, many of the questions have gone unanswered, i.e. 7 words from Brahm, 2 mysterious women with Angela, etc. I'm not asking about any of these in particular, but rather, how do you plan on answering these questions we are still dying to know?" Oh, that's a good question. Well, part of it is, as I said before, I want to write a lot more stories set in this world. And when I was a reader, when I first started reading sci-fi and fantasy, so when I was 13, 14, 15, and even younger, it really annoyed me as a reader that there were these authors who would write these series that I would really enjoy the beginning series, but it would go on and on and on and on. So first of all, I was determined I was going to provide a definite end for the series that I was going to write, for the Inheritance cycle. But it also annoyed me when you would have an author who would write one book, two book, three books, four books, and then you could see that it was like the author realized his books were selling, or her books were selling, and that he or she needed to write more in this series. So all of a sudden, even though the hero has defeated, or heroine has defeated, the big bad evil villain in book 1, 2, or 3, wherever the end of the story would normally be, so even though the evil villain's been defeated, in the next book, all of a sudden another villain pops out of nowhere, and literally out of nowhere. You almost never would find any mention of the villain in the later books that you would find in the first few books. Things like that, where it felt to me like the world was being put together piecemeal. So I was very determined when writing the Inheritance cycle that I was going to put in mentions of other stories, little intersections between Eragon's saga and these other stories that I want to tell in the series. And that's part of what, like, the 7 words from Brahm are, or the 2 women that Angela did the fortune-telling with and others. It's going to take me a little while to get to those stories and write them. I'll be honest with you. It's going to take me a little bit to write them. Mainly because, again, I need a little break, and I want to try some other types of stories. But I do plan to return to them. That's the thing. I did not put them, sort of those mentions in casually. Spent a lot of time thinking about it, talked with my editor, and I knew that, that there definitely would be a few unanswered questions here and there in Inheritance. But that's the other thing, is I also feel that you don't want to tie everything up too neatly. I mean, the thing is that life goes on. If I write a book 5, and I am going to write a book 5 at some point, there are still going to be unanswered questions there. They may not be the same unanswered questions, but they'll still be unanswered questions, and that's because life doesn't stop all at once at the end of a book. Not in my world. Everything just doesn't get wrapped up in a neat little bow. So, there's always going to be some unanswered questions, but hopefully it'll be interesting, and we'll keep you guys engaged in the world, and when you do get some answers, you'll like those, and then you'll still have some new ones to look forward to. That's also kind of my approach to writing about the character of Angela the herbalist, too. My goal with her has always been that every time I answer one question about her, I try to raise at least 2 more, sometimes 3. That said, if and when I write book 5, her backstory is going to feature rather prominently in the book. Of course, I won't answer every question about her, but we'll definitely learn a little bit more about her. All right, here we go. Question number 10, and this is from Jake, who wrote this on December 4th at 10:36 p.m. And Jake said, "What does your normal workday look like?" Well, that really depends on whether or not I have a deadline or not. First of all, I do a lot of my writing right where you're seeing me now. This is my office, and I'm staring into my computer here. I also do a lot of writing by hand, so that's something else I might be doing. But really, the only 3 places I do writing are in the chair I'm in now, in my sofa right over here, which I know you guys can't see, and then I have a drafting table across the room, which is where I do my handwriting for the most part. So my normal schedule when I don't have a deadline is I get up in the morning, I grab tea, grab some breakfast, I do some reading, maybe do some walking. I basically let myself wake up, let my brain start to work. When I feel like I'm getting ready to work, I'll usually reread the last page or so that I wrote the previous day, and that sort of helps remind me of what I was writing, gets me in the mood, also lets me do a little editing on what I wrote previously. Then I will start writing, and this is usually around, let's say if I get up at 8, then I'll probably be writing by 9 at the, maybe 8:30. Yeah, 9's a little long. It's usually by 8:30 or so. So if I'm up at 8, then by 8:30 I'm usually writing. And then I will write until lunch, noon, and I'll usually eat while I'm at my desk. I might take a brief break, but I'll eat, I'll keep writing, and then I'll usually stop around 2, maybe 3, but usually 2. And that's a good chunk of writing. And then at that point, I'll just stop, I'll exercise, I'll do some drawing, I'll do some metalworking, I'll just do something to get my mind off the writing. And that's how I prefer to work. If I have a deadline, then it's a little bit different. Then I get up in the morning, I grab breakfast, I sit down, I start writing, I work through to lunch, I work through lunch, I work through the afternoon, I stop for dinner, watch a movie with my family or something, maybe bounce around for 5 minutes before dinner, and then I start working again after dinner, and I keep working through the evening and usually late into the night, as late as I can take it. That's not really a great way to work long term, and you can't really keep it up for too long without getting sleep deprived. So I don't recommend it to anyone. But when I've been under the gun with a deadline and really had to do a lot of writing very quickly, then that's what I'll do. At one point or another, I remember at one chunk of time I actually did something like 230,000 words in 3.5 months. So a lot of writing. I could probably make a good stab at NaNoWriMo, the National Novel Writing Month contest. So that's how my writing tends to go. It's the first schedule is more normal, and the second schedule is sort of when I'm up against the wall with deadlines. But the deadlines are past for the moment, so I don't think I'll have to worry about that anytime soon. Douglas Adams, the author who wrote The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, he had a wonderful, wonderful quote about deadlines, which pretty much every author I've met absolutely loves. And what he said is, and I might be paraphrasing slightly, but I'm pretty sure this is the actual quote. He said, I love deadlines. So I love the sound they make as they whoosh past. So I'm not quite that bad, but I definitely understand what he was saying. And I believe that brings us to the end of the 10 questions. Sorry there aren't more here. I'd love to keep talking here for quite a bit. This has been a lot of fun, and I want to thank you all for the very interesting questions. They gave me something to talk about here. And I want to thank you guys for reading, or either you have read or you're going to read Inheritance, I hope, and I want to thank you for that. Inheritance was the hardest book of this series to write because I was so concerned with making it as good as possible, and also because it was just so big. But I'm very proud of it, and I think it's the very best book in the series. And I hope you guys feel the same way. And I also hope that you're going to enjoy my future books, this science fiction book, and everything else I'm going to write in the future. And, I look forward to meeting you, hopefully meeting some of you on tour the next time out on the road. But in the meantime, I want to just say thank you to you for all of your support. I'm trying to think if there's anything I can tell you about the next stuff I'm going to be doing. No, afraid not. Afraid not. Aside from the writing, I've got a couple of drawings I'm going to be doing, which I think you'll be able to see. Though they're going to show up fairly soon. And I'm going to be, well, personally, I'm going to be making myself a chainmail hauberk finally. Always wanted one of those. So that's a project I've got going on the side. But hopefully we'll have some announcements on the writing and projects and stuff before too long. But in any case, this has been an amazing journey with this series. It's been the defining event of my life. And it really means a lot to me to know that you and a lot of other people have been reading along with me this whole while. So again, thank you. And as Eragon himself would say, Sioner Sverdar Sitya Havas. May your swords stay sharp. And I'm going to sign out here. All right. Thank you.